So welcome to Diabetes UK's Diabetes and XSR webinar, which is a part of our New Together Type 1 Toolkit series. So Together Type 1 is our new youth programme, and this series of webinars is created by young people living with Type 1 and also run by them too. I'm Lucy and I'll be your host for the evening. So I'm the youth coordinator at Diabetes UK in the north of England, but we do have equivalents across the UK. I also have type 1 diabetes myself, and I do play football for my regional team, Runcorn Linnets FC. So I will be able to answer any football questions later on the Q&A panel. We will be recording tonight's session. So if you have any family or friends that would like to watch it, or you'd like to forward it on to anybody, we will be recording it and we will send that out in a link via Eventbrite after the event, probably next week once it's loaded up. As this is a webinar, you've probably noticed already, there isn't any videos or audio for yourself, as it is a webinar series. But what we do recommend is do pop anything in the chat. It may be that you've got a setting set at the moment where your message will only go to hosts and panelists. So you want to change that to everyone if you do want your message to go to everyone, because we will be asking a few questions in there to keep engaged. So it'd be really good if we can get the chat going, and please do pop any questions in there as we will be holding a Q&A later on. So we've got some good sessions coming up tonight. So first up, we'll be hearing from Cameron Scott and how diabetes hasn't stopped him to achieve his goals as a professional rugby player. And also we'll learn a little bit more about how he manages his type 1 day to day. And then we'll be passing over to our amazing young leaders, Gemma and George, where they'll be talking a little bit more about the sport they play, cricket. So before we get started, there should be one poll question that we will pop up on your screen in the next couple of moments. And then if you're able to fill this out, that'd be great. So the first one will be around those living with diabetes. So does your condition hold you back from participating in sport? So if you could answer that, that'd be fabulous. It just helps us to sort of evaluate our sessions. I can see them coming in there. That's great. And then we will be able to evaluate this at the end as well, which is really helpful. So I'll just give you a few more moments for that. Just the last few, if you haven't already. Last couple coming in, and then we'll be able to end that for you. Perfect. Thank you everyone for taking part. It just helps us, again, like I say, evaluate our events. We will be asking sort of similar questions at the end. So a big welcome to Cameron, who's our first speaker today, who I'm sure many of you will know, but of course I won't steal his thunder. So Cameron, do you want to introduce yourself? And yes, tell us why you're here.
Yes, I'm Cam Scott. I play professional rugby league in the top division over in the UK. Currently playing at Hull FC. I've been diabetic for type 1 for 10 years now. That was just last month. And I've gone through the journey of playing through all the levels and making it to the top. And I've probably been doing that for the best part of 4 or 5 years now. Been a full-time professional for 7 years. And like I say, been through the journey from juniors up until first team now, having diabetes full time. So, it's been a really long process and things that's had plenty of ups and downs, but I've made it, and I'm now a regular in the top comp in the UK.
Fabulous, thank you, Cameron. So thank you for being here to start with. We really appreciate it. And like the start of most stories, we'll start at diagnosis. So could you talk us a little bit around your diagnosis story, maybe when it was, and yeah, how it came about? How did you feel about it?
Yes, I was diagnosed in February 2014, so like I say, just over 10 years ago. It probably first started towards the end of November in 2013. Just a bit of a strange time. Obviously, exams were coming around at school, and I kind of just put everything down to a bit of stress. My family were the same. You know, we knew something was wrong, but weren't really too sure. Never really had too much about it. So yeah, just started with me starting to go to the toilet a lot more frequently, and you know whether that be in school, whether it was at home. I was
Hmm.
getting up sometimes, you know, 6, 7, 8 times a night, and as I was going to the toilet, I'd straight away be down in a pint of water next to me.
Yeah.
And again, obviously, there was nothing that we really understood what that was, and that continued for months on end. You know, started to lose a lot of weight, and you know, I was only 14 at the time, so I didn't have much on me. And I think at one point ended up down at just below 7 stone, which you know, for a 14-year-old kid was not good for anyone. You know, struggling to get up in the morning, struggling to concentrate for through school days. You know, playing sport, I had absolutely nothing to me. I was you know gasping after probably the best part of 10 minutes. And then, like I say, in February 2014, just got to the point where I crashed. You know, I was in severe ketone acidosis. You know, throwing literally acid up,
Mm.
and just in the worst way possible. And I'd already had a doctor's appointment booked that my mum had sorted for me just to go get seen to. And at that appointment, it was just basically when they said, yeah, you need to be admitted. You know, these are all the symptoms of type 1. And yeah, and that was that really.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Obviously, everyone's diagnosis story is so different, and so it's obviously the symptoms were there, and we do sort of share them symptoms of the 40s, so toilet first, tiredness, thinner. So it is about getting those symptoms out there and people making people aware. Thank you for that. So all of this sort of coincides with a career of professional rugby. So how long have you been in the pro game for, and where did you make your breakthrough?
So so actually after that diagnosis, I had trials at Bradford, which
Hmm.
obviously were my local professional team. That was 2 weeks after coming out of hospital. So
Wow.
you know, I went and did those trials, and just thought, you know, I've got nothing to lose. I didn't really expect to get anywhere from them because physically I was just nowhere near.
Yeah.
And you know, obviously no surprises. I got knocked back from those. So I just kind of took myself away from sport a little bit, from school, from my amateur team, and just kind of got focused on my health. You know, getting back to a healthy weight, just being healthy really. You know, anything that was a stress, just kind of took it away, and made sure I was well again. And then end of 2014, that's when I got my scholarship at Bradford. So I had 2 years there, um, through to 16. I then played for England under 16s, um, that later year as well, twice. Um, and then signed an academy deal at Bradford. Um, and you know, things were all looking well. And then Bradford ran into some money trouble, and that was when I had some interest from some other clubs, and Hull came over and offered me my first full time deal at 16, and that was the only team to do so. So I snapped the hands off at that. So yeah, started at 16, and then debuted the year after at 18, and then probably didn't really hit my straps or the potential that I had through that. Captain England Academy, and then probably from 21 onwards now, you know, I've been a regular since then. You know, I'm closing in on 100 career games and not too far off 100 games for Hull as well. So that's kind of over the last 3, 4 years where I've made my name really.
Wow, it's amazing how much you've achieved in that time. And even, when you were diagnosed, still pushing through and going to those trials, no matter what, whether you were not back or not, you were still raring to go and wanted to achieve something. So just a massive well done for all that you've achieved. So how do you typically prepare for like sort of like training, match day? Does it look different or is it the same?
Training is probably a bit different. You know, it's a bit of a longer day.
Hmm.
So, for example, you know, we're playing tomorrow in the derby. It's a 12:30 kickoff. So I'll go eat after this. Tend to have, you know, a really high carb meal a bit later on if it's an earlier kickoff. So that'll be that tonight. And then in the morning, I always eat 4 hours before kickoff so that everything's you know, in your system, ready for when the game starts. So, like I say, for a 12:30 kickoff, my last meal will be 8:30 tomorrow morning. Obviously, that'll be my last insulin doses as well.
Hmm.
I play with the Freestyle Libre 2, so I've got that fitted. obviously that monitors everything through training and through games as well. So for games, I always used to have a bit of an issue actually with them, riding really high once a game starts, with all the
Mm-hmm.
adrenaline, things like
Yeah.
that. So to counteract that just before going out for kickoff, probably literally the last 5 minutes of it, I always tend to take 2 units just to make sure that I stay within the range, because as much as I've tried over the years, once you get going in a game, you probably know yourself that
Yeah.
it's pretty difficult to keep them down. So that's kind of what I've worked for myself. As for training, obviously, you have your intense periods in training, but with it being a longer day, I tend not to do that because we've got breaks in between. So it'll just be standard doses, how that is, and my sugars tend to go up when we are out on the field. But then once we've finished and come back in, and we've got a break in between, before the next half of the day, they work their way down anyway. So
Yeah.
like I say, training's completely different with it being over a longer day, but obviously with a game day being 80 minutes, that's the full focus, and that's the focus of the week. So there's more around that than when it comes to training.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, like you say, I'm the same with football. I tend to sort of spike when playing. I guess it is more manageable, when you are at training, because like you say, it's a longer day, you've got breaks. So it's quite interesting to see the difference in it, and like the different types of training that you do. I know you do some weight training and then some sort of like cardio, and then obviously ball work as well. So does that affect the different types of exercise, affect your blood sugars levels and stuff like that?
Yeah, it does. It's always the more intense. So obviously, heavy gym sessions, they tend to have a spike as well. But then on the field, if it's pretty low key and it's just skill based, you'll barely see anything.
Yeah.
And then if it comes to team on team, and chances are in training you play more high speed games. So again, that spikes the intensity too. So anything with big intensity spikes, or where you feel like your body's really going through it, that's where I have a reaction. But then again, obviously, like there's times where we'll just sit, we'll do movement, skill based stuff, um, and then like I say, there's plenty of different variations, and they all have different effects on my sugars.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So how do the club support you? Do you speak to the lads about it? Do you have a team around you that are they all aware of it? And how do they support you whilst you're playing and things like that?
Yeah, so I rent a place in Hull with a couple of teammates, so they're all clued up on it as well.
Oh, that's good.
Just in case it's a worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got their support, and then obviously all the staff as well. My coach Tony, he asks a fair bit. Because he said it's something I'm quite naive to, and something that he feels like he wants to learn more about. So if he's ever got any issues, he comes to me. Obviously, I've got the medical staff that know the ins and outs of it as well, and they're on top of it. I've had to have some surgeries recently that
Yeah.
they were just double checking to make sure it was no direct link to being type 1.
Mm-hmm.
So they're on top of it. If there's a break in play in a game, they're always just giving me a nudge, making sure I'm all right. And one of our physios always has my phone as well during a game, just so that they can run up and literally tap the back of my arm for my Libra sensor. And so yeah, they're all really on top of it. I think it's kind of something that a lot of people don't understand. So they've really made a conscious effort to understand how it works and how it affects, and how they need to stay on top of it as well.
Yeah, I think it's such an important part of having type 1 if you are. So, your sport, your career. So it is definitely important. It makes you feel a lot more comfortable. All my coaching staff know, and I think it just makes you feel more comfortable when doing something that you enjoy. So yeah, it's nice that they do sort of put their arm around you. And that's really good. Do you know any other rugby players with type 1?
So one of my old coaches was actually type 1,
Ah,
Richard
nice.
Horn, who played at Hull as well. Played his full career there. So I spoke to him a fair bit when he was coaching. He's not been here for a couple of years now, but
Yeah.
he had the same issues. He developed it from a neck injury.
Right.
So his was later on in life. But obviously, like as most people know, what works for some doesn't necessarily work for others. So we tried touch base and see what worked in that respect. But to have someone who's a bit older and probably had it a little bit longer, and had managed it through the game as well. Literally the same club as well, same club, same team. So that really helps. But if I'm honest, I think I'm probably one of the only ones now in Super League. There was a couple previously, but they've all retired. So I think I'm flying the flag on my own at the minute.
Well, keep doing it. You're doing it well. So, I always like asking this question. So, favorite moment for you in rugby, and also a favorite moment in your career. So, it could be back in grassroots, or it could be more in the pro game. So, any highlights of your career?
I think captain in England under 18s, that was massive. We played Australia at the end of 2018, and obviously that's the big pinnacle of rugby league over there.
Yeah.
We managed to beat them 2-0 in a series win, so that was massive. I think we're only the second team to do that. So that was massive. And I think even just, finally getting that letter through the door of having an opportunity for a scholarship, after being knocked away, months before, and obviously being diagnosed, I just think, I probably don't give myself enough credit for actually getting on the board after that, with it being such a difficult time.
Yeah.
But then even now, just to being able to say that, my what was once a hobby is now a career. I get to get up every day and do what I enjoy doing, and really get the best out of it. And for a full career, 10, 15 years, I can say that I've barely gone to work, and I think that's probably one of the best things out of it all.
Oh, that's brilliant. Like you say, I mean, captaining England is a massive, massive proud moment for you, and you should be proud of that. I'm sure your family are as well. So last couple of questions for you. So, have you ever run into any sort of challenges? I know you've touched a little bit about where you sort of blood spike during games and things like that, but any specific challenges that you've faced?
Yeah, so there was a game last year we played Huddersfield away, and for whatever reason, I still can't put my finger on it now. I just got things completely wrong, with insulin, and my sugar spiked, and they just weren't coming down. Like, they're just nowhere near whatsoever. So obviously, I was spending loads of time going to the toilet pre-game, and then obviously everything I needed in my body was then leaving my body. So at the time, I got to about 35 minutes, and I could start feeling both my calves and both my hamstrings starting to cramp. So I knew what was wrong. So obviously, as soon as I start feeling cramp, I take the energy gels. But then in return, that was spiking my sugars even more. So in trying to combat it, I actually made it worse.
Yeah.
So I got to about probably 55 minutes in the second half, and chased a kick downfield, and both my calves just cramped up to the point where I couldn't walk, and my hamstrings were screaming as well. So I just had to come off and just literally lay on the sideline and just have a physio try. Try just release my cramp.
Yeah.
So that's probably the worst one. And like I say, obviously I can't really put my finger on it, but I just know I got it all wrong. And obviously everything I needed from pre-match with electrolytes and things like that had just disappeared. So I was pretty much running on empty.
Yeah, it's like you say, you can't put your finger on it, but I think that's sort of day to day type 1. Sometimes there's different factors that play out with blood sugars, and sometimes you just don't know what the factor is that why it's like that, and that's quite common. So, it's something I've definitely had a game like that before, where I've sort of had my bloods up in 30, and I just didn't know why, and the same, taking on loads of liquids, and it was just awful. I had to end up coming off in the end as well. So last question for you. So what tips would you pass on to any budding young rugby players, and then also any young type 1s on the call as well? Any sort of inspiring last moments for you?
I just think just don't give up on it. It's so easy to just think that it's the end, that you've got a condition, but once you look after it and just accept it for what it is, it's not really a stumbling block. I can't remember life without it now, and I think that's probably the biggest thing. It just becomes part of your day to day, and I think for me personally, I just never wanted to use it as an excuse. It is tough, but that's life. That's how I've got to live with it, and that's how you have to live with it when you're diagnosed. So not to use it as an excuse, but use it to your advantage, really. Grab control of it, and there's actually benefits to having it in a sporting sense too. So I think once you've got that diagnosis, just really put your foot down and go for it, and yeah, really give it a go. I think that's what I took best from it is you're not going to change it, so sitting there sulking is probably not going to do you any favors. Just try to get on with the next job.
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you. And yeah, I just want to say a massive thank you for joining us. Rosie's just popped in the chat there. If anyone does have any questions for Cam, please pop them in the chat and then we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. I know you'll have inspired many young people on the call today, so just a massive thank you. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing, and you're just an inspiration to all. So thank you for joining us.
No worries, thank you.
No worries. So next up, we've got our young leaders. So our young leaders are part of our youth program, Together Type 1, and they will be having a conversation between them both, George and Gemma. So I'd just like to welcome them on screen and hand it over to them to introduce themselves. So yes, over to Gemma and George.
Hi guys, I'm Gemma. I'm 24 years old and I'm from Kent. I play both netball and cricket on a weekly basis. Obviously cricket not in the winter months. But yeah, I'm here today to just talk to you about my journey in sport with diabetes.
And I'm George. I'm 24. I live in Ascot, and I had sort of a semi-professional, professional career in cricket with Surrey and Somerset from about 2016 to 2023. So yeah, here to talk about my sort of experiences with Type 1 and cricket. So, right, where should we start? We start from the beginning. Let's talk about diagnosis and how it all came about.
Yeah, okay, I'll go first. So I was diagnosed when I was 8 years old, so 16 years ago now. And a bit like what Cameron said, and I think what most diabetics would have struggled with, I became thirsty, I was drinking so much, going to the toilet a lot, and I actually was wetting the beds, and as an 8-year-old, that wasn't quite the norm. I was also very tired. My mum would tell me that I was telling her that I had tired legs when we were shopping and that I wanted to be picked up. And it's like, Gemma, no, you're 8 years old now. You can walk around the shops. But we started recognising the signs, and my granddad has type 1 diabetes. So he kind of was the first one to pick it up to my mum that, hold on a second, this could be diabetes. And he actually tested my blood sugar levels with his meter, and when we saw the sugar level, we realised, okay, we need to get a doctor's appointment. So yeah, we got an emergency one, and I went to the hospital straight away, and that's where I found out that I was type 1. What about you, George?
Weirdly, that I'm similar. I was diagnosed when I was 14, so actually my Cam and my sort of story is very similar. I was diagnosed when I was 14, and I sort of had the classic symptoms. Was really thirsty, was getting really thin, and just had no energy when I was playing sport. But actually, my older brother, so I have two older brothers, and my older brother, he is also a type 1 diabetic. So he was diagnosed when he was 12, and I must have been about 8 at the time. So I grew up knowing diabetes, having Lucozade in the corner of rooms, having needles sort of like dotted everywhere, having dextrosol. So I knew a lot about it from quite a young age. And actually, to that, luckily, like my mum and dad knew a lot about it as well. So when I started to have those symptoms, my mum was, I remember quite distinctly standing on sort of a high street and being quite ill, and my mum was like, "Oh, just sort of just breathe on me," and I breathed, and she was like, "Oh, I can smell ketones on your breath. I think you're diabetic," because she'd been through it all before with my brother.
Yeah.
So she was like, and I sort of, no, I'm not diabetic. And then 2 weeks later, I remember Googling online symptoms, seeing all the sort of red flags. And then next day got tested, and I think my blood sugar was at 36. So, my diagnosis, I think, is a bit unique in the sense that I already knew about it. And actually, I've grown up now just chatting to my brother about diabetes. So that's where it all began for me. But let's move on to sports. I guess that's what we're here to chat about. So yeah, cricket career. How did you get into cricket? And yeah.
So cricket wasn't my first sport I played. I've played netball since I was in primary school, so from the age of about 9, 10. And then I did athletics and I was a javelin thrower. And I travelled to London for a lot of competitions. And it became a very individual sport where it was quite lonely. Everyone had their own warm-ups and did their own things. And I was quite a sociable person. So I wanted to find a sport that I could play in a team. And someone approached me in my school saying that a local team close by were going to set up a ladies team and whether I'd be interested. I'd never really played cricket, but I was keen to give it a go, and I just fell in love with it. This was when I was just turned 17. So we started right from the bottom, our team. We had like 5 probably ladies that started at the training sessions. Gradually we grew. Younger girls came along, older ladies came along, and in 2018 we set up a competitive ladies team and we entered a development league, and from there we've just grown as a club. We now are fielding 2 teams this year, a premiership team which I'll be captaining and a development team, and it's just wonderful to see how much women in sport are like increasing, and it's just a great story for the club that within the last 6 years we now have, from not having a single team to 2 competitive cricket teams. So what about you, George?
That's great to hear, because yeah, women's cricket is becoming so much more popular, and it is really good to see with 100 and everything.
Yeah.
Well, my story, I having 2 older brothers, we always used to play in the back garden, and being the youngest, I was always the one to sort of do the the non-fun bit, so bowling and fielding. But I loved it. I've always sort of loved sport and was always an essential part of my life. Like I played a lot of football, sort of had trials with Fulham when I was younger, played a lot of cricket, but then ultimately I went down the cricket route because I loved it, and I'm quite tall, so actually I had a bit of a sort of leg up on people. And I sort of enjoyed it at school, and then when I was 15, 16, I was signed for Surrey Academy, um, which is a sort of a great county to be a part of. And from then on, I went sort of on tours to Sri Lanka, to South Africa, to sort of all these really cool places, but actually challenged, being a diabetic, it challenged me a little bit because you're in different climates. And I guess, as you know, cricket is a very long game. It's not 90 minutes. You can't plan it.
Yeah.
You can be going through times where I'm bowling sort of 7 overs in a row to sort of standing in the field doing nothing for a couple of hours. So I then went on to play. I went to university, but in 2020 in COVID, unfortunately, I got released from Surrey. But then went on to play for Somerset a bit because I was down at Exeter University. So played for them. And then I went to Australia after I left university and played in Sydney, which is a really cool experience, something I've always wanted to do. And sort of came back, played a little bit more for Sussex and Kent, but sort of decided to sort of move on from cricket last year, to sort of go and see what else out there is. But I mean, it's always essential, and I still play at the weekends. And as sort of the thing is, I loved playing it, and I think playing sport, enjoying it's the most important thing. So that's how I got into sort of cricket, and it's been sort of part of my life for 10 years. But as I mentioned, did you find any sort of, how did you prepare and manage for cricket? Because it is different in terms that it is a long old day.
Yeah, I think it all depends because I play in 2 different types of format. I play the T20 and the 40 over games. So on a Saturday, I tend to play for the men, which is a 40 over game. And the ladies used to always be 20 overs, but they were sometimes 40. So I had a bit of a different kind of plan for both games, because the 20 over game was quite a fast paced game, because it's more about, trying to score runs as quick as possible. So especially if you were one of the higher order bats, I was a number 3. So I would be out there playing quite high intensity, you know, trying to hit the heavy shots for 4s and 6s and running between the wickets. So for that, I would always tend to have a high carbohydrate meal 2 hours before. Games usually started at 1. So around 11 o'clock, it was kind of like a brunch. So late breakfast, early lunch. I'd make sure that, I had quite a lot of carbohydrate in that to get me through. But sometimes it's quite hard to predict what your levels are going to do, no matter how much you prepare. You know, you never know what diabetes is going to throw at you, because sometimes, especially in finals or like the knockout stages, the adrenaline is running, and adrenaline and diabetes, obviously, it can spike your sugar levels. So you prepare so that you don't drop, but then the opposite happens and you go high. So it is quite hard to juggle, and I guess all you can do is try your best, try and be prepared. So my umpire, who is my coach, he always has in his pocket my pump and glucose gel. So I can always go over to him halfway through a game, or any time of the game really, and I could just quickly check my levels with my sensor, make sure I can see if it's going up or down, of whether I need to have a bit of glucose or inject like a unit of insulin. I don't like to inject more than 1.5 units, because I know that all of a sudden I could have kind of a downward graph. So it's just all about trial and error really, and hoping for the best. What about you? How do you prepare?
Well, I played sort of 3 formats. So longer formats with 4-day sort of stuff, like Test match cricket if you watch TV, over cricket and T20 cricket. And as you said, every different format brings their different sort of difficulties. Because 4-day cricket, if we were bowling and I'm a bowler, we could be standing in the field for 96 overs, and which is about 25,000 steps. And, you know, I don't know how many overs I'd bowl. So I'd always try to prepare in the same way. And that would be a big meal in the morning, which normally would be porridge for long sort of acting carbohydrates. And then luckily we sort of have lunch and tea. So times where we can sort of actually get my blood sugars level, have a look at what they're doing, and go from there. Whereas sort of, as you said, T20 cricket is a little bit more high paced, a little bit more sort of.
I've lost a little. I don't know whether it's just me having that problem.
Am I back?
Yeah, I think it was Gemma's that dropped out there. I could still hear you, George.
Oh, okay, that's okay then.
but you're back now.
What was the last thing you heard?
I don't know, it all went a bit muffled, but if everyone else heard, that's absolutely fine.
Continue. Yeah, so T20 cricket is a little bit more fast paced. So obviously adrenaline and everything would be sort of kicking around. So that would be a little bit more. I would try not necessarily to eat a lot and actually sort of eat after the match in that sort of way, just to control my blood sugars. But I found sort of techniques over the few years, and one would be carrying sort of Dextrosols in my pocket. So whenever I'd be fielding, I sort of would have something on me to sort of quickly get my blood sugars up. So giving the umpire sort of a blood sugar monitor. So if I did feel a little bit, you know, not right, I could sort of quickly do a finger prick and then see where my blood sugars were. But cricket, like unlike sort of football and rugby, is sometimes you're waiting to bat, so you don't know when you're going to go in. You don't know how long it's there for. So in 4-day cricket, I'd been sitting for about sort of 2 hours waiting to bat. So you know you prepare, but then you just never know. So
Yeah.
So that's sort of one of the annoying things about cricket. Whereas I guess football and rugby, you can sort of prepare and you know you're going to be on the pitch till 80 minutes. But on the sort of topic of sort of, you know, sort of how we're managing it, technology. So have you changed over the years, or have you sort of been the same since you've been an 8-year-old?
So it's crazy how much technology has like advanced. I think it's absolutely amazing. Because I remember when I was that little 8-year-old girl, I was told I was going to have to prick my finger for the rest of my life and inject 4 times a day, which was quite scary when you're young. But when I was 13, I was given a Medtronic pump, and then when I was 15 or 16, I think 16, I started self-funding for the Libra when it first came about. And now I am just recently in January, I started the new system, which is the Omnipod 5 with the Dexcom G6. So it's a looped link system, which is absolutely incredible. It is a godsend. So now I don't know if people on this chat will know about this device, but basically it continuously sends the blood glucose levels to your pump. Your pump will adjust for what it can predict, basically. So if it starts to see your levels rising, it will start injecting a little bit more in your basal to bring it back level. And likewise, if your levels start to drop, it will then reduce the insulin to try and prevent the hypo. And so I haven't had a cricket season yet with this piece of technology, but I am praying that it's going to do the world of wonders, because it basically is doing the job for me. Obviously, still having to bolus for foods, and if your levels go really high, to do a correction. But hopefully, if it starts spiking in a 40 over game when you're not always on your, looking at your levels, hopefully it will start correcting it for me, which will just make everything a bit easier. What about you, George? What do you use?
Well, it sounds like we're in the same boat, because I was always on injections. So having an older brother who is diabetic, I always like to sort of be in the same technological sort of circle as him, because we'd always chat about it. So yeah, I remember when he was first diagnosed, the needles then were huge, but then actually they weren't toned down a little bit. So when I was, they weren't too scary. But yeah, I was finger pricking for a period of time, and looking back on that now, I think I couldn't do it again. And then went on to the Libra, then went on to the Dexcom, and it did make life so much easier. But actually 2 weeks ago, I've gone on to the Omnipod. I was always sort of floating around the idea about going on a pump, but I found with cricket especially, I wasn't really keen on the idea of having something on me in case I got hit in the nets, or when I was weight training or running. I didn't really like the idea of sort of wires and stuff like that. But then actually now I sort of toned down cricket and sort of moved on slightly and not playing as much. I was like, I really have a go, because I'd never know otherwise. So I went on to the Omnipod 5, and it's so amazing. Generally, it's so amazing.
Yeah.
I sort of obviously put in my sort of bolus, and then I've never seen flat lines like it, which is so good. So I'm really excited. Season now, I don't have to worry about some of the things, calculations that necessarily I've been doing, but I can appreciate that it takes a little bit of a jump to move on from what you've been doing. I mean, I've always been pretty good at managing my blood sugar, so I was still slightly scared about moving on. But the green is grass on the other. The sort of, actually, it's worked out pretty well, which is great. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I think Cam spoke about it quite well. Do your sort of teammates and clubs chat to you about diabetes, or have you sort of always been a little bit of left it behind? Or
I didn't catch the first bit of that question.
so do you speak to your teammates or clubs about sort of diabetes and about how you sort of deal with it? Or
I'm very fortunate. My coach is a type 2 diabetic, so he has a lot of awareness of what diabetes is. So when I first joined the cricket club, he heavily supported me. He always knew the signs of if I was going to be going low or high. And the team overall as well are very supportive. I'm the only diabetic on the team, but a lot of like the younger girls that are school age, they always say, oh, my friend at school's diabetic and this, that and the other. So I think now people wear the like sensors on their arms and stuff. I think people are a lot more aware of diabetes, and I think people are becoming a little bit more aware of what it entails and stuff. So yeah, I've been quite supported by my team. And like I said about my coach, he always has something in his pocket for me when we're on the field, so that he'll come over to me straight away if I'm going a bit flaky. he'll know that I need to test my levels, have some glucose. I normally come off the pitch as well if I am going low, because you don't want to be, low and then a cricket ball coming to you at fast pace. How about you? How has your team supported you?
Like again, similarly, like I sort of discussed with my friends, but then actually I've always been, I always think you should talk to people about it, but I've always been quite sheltered in the sense that I'm the one who has to deal with it. So I want to look after it myself. So when I was younger, I sort of didn't necessarily tell people. People would only sort of know when I was at lunch sort of injecting in front of people. And that would always be my sort of intro. They'd be like, oh, like a type 1 I didn't know you were a type 1 diabetic. And I think in a weird way, I quite like that because I want to be as normal as possible. And I think that's how I went about it. But I do suggest to people to actually chat about it, because at times on the cricket pitch, I would sort of be having a low and I would sort of not tell anyone. Whereas actually, if like you've got a bowl in 5 minutes or 10 overs, that it'd be better to let them know. So I always kept it quiet. But then my Surrey coaches, my teammates all knew I was diabetic. All my friends do, which is great, and they know sort of how to deal with it. But I was a little bit more of a lone ranger in that sort of way. So sometimes don't be like me, but then obviously I didn't want to rely on anyone else. I sort of wanted to know or have the best sort of management I could, and that's why I sort of wanted to do that. But have we sort of reached a point where we want to talk about how sport has sort of impacted our diabetes, and what we could pass on to some young leaders? Have I missed that? Can you hear me?
I think Gemma's froze there. Are you back?
I'm here. It's just George keeps freezing. So if he asked me a question, I didn't hear it.
Okay. So I think, should we talk about what we can pass on to some young leaders, and the impact of sport, and advice we can going forward?
Oh yeah. So what I would say is that diabetes can feel like a barrier in life to a lot of things. And I just think that the most important thing is to not let it be a barrier to exercise. I've always used exercise for my mental health. I think it's like one of the biggest medications for mental well-being. And I think that diabetes can affect your mental well-being as well. So I think you do not want to take that away, like exercise away from that, because it's such a big coping mechanism. So I would just say, do not let it stop you. There are people out there within sports teams that will have awareness of what diabetes is, and how to support you. And I just think, don't be scared, because actually the exercise can help you manage your diabetes. It can actually lower your HbA1c. There's studies about it, of how vital exercise is in improving type 1 diabetics sugar levels. So I just think, just do it, go for it, take the plunge if you haven't already, get involved, and you won't regret it. What about you, George?
I think that's so good. I totally agree. I think don't be scared to try sport, because it's given me so much joy, and a lot of my best mates and the people I've met have been involved within sport. Cricket is a team sport, and you spend a lot of time sitting on the sidelines chatting. And I think it's one of those things that sport has always helped me with my diabetes. Whenever I'm running slightly high, I'll go for a run. Whenever I want to release some stress, I'll go to the gym. And it's given me so much enjoyment. And I think diabetes, it's one of those things that, of course, like, it's something that is annoying, but actually it's given me some great organization skills. And I think that's the main sort of advice I would give, is just be organized. I think whenever you're going to go for a run, have Dextrosols in your pocket, have some Haribos in your pocket, just in case you have that low. Or whether you're sort of going to the gym, just have a Lucozade with you. And that sort of, from being a young sort of 14-year-old, I had to grow up quite quickly, because I had to be a little bit a step ahead of other people. I can just go about willy-nilly without any Dextrosols or sugar on me. So that'd be my advice, is sort of definitely go and do it, because it's given me so much. But just be a little bit more organized, because that's sort of it. That's how I've sort of done it, really.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the only thing. The only difference between a diabetic and a non-diabetic sport is that you just have to have preparation for the highs or the lows. So as long as you can make sure that you're organised in the sense you've got your insulin, you've got hypo snacks, then there's no reason why you shouldn't get involved. I guess now it's over to Lucy, because I think we've got Q&As.
Yes, so thank you both so much. It's amazing to have you both here, and I really enjoyed, listening in, because I know I don't know both of you. So it's really nice to hear about your sport and how you cope with type 1 diabetes. And you are an inspiration to all of the young people with type 1. So thank you for sharing your story. And yes, we're going to move on to Q&A now. And I do apologise about the chat. We've only just realised that it was actually disabled. And I was thinking it's quiet. We usually have a lot of comments coming in. So keep them coming in and we'll be able to answer any questions that you've got. So we'll get Cam back on. Perfect. And I will just add you. There we go. So we will go into the questions. So there are quite a few, I think, coming through. So let me just go through. So this one's for Cameron. I think you touched on it a little bit around how long have you lived with type 1 diabetes for, Cameron?
So it's 10 years. I was diagnosed when I was 14.
Cool. And so obviously you're playing rugby before having diabetes. And I think actually George and Gemma have just actually answered it in a way as well, because, it is all about preparation. But what's different from playing rugby before to now is do you find there's a massive difference, or is it just day-to-day management?
I think it's difficult to compare because obviously I've not played at the level I have without diabetes. So for me, it's all I've ever known. But I can imagine the difference. Obviously, when I was playing, even at grassroots level, it was just rock up half an hour before kick-off on a Sunday morning and hope for the best. Whereas now, obviously, there is a lot more thought process that goes into it and a lot more management. So that, like the guy said before, that's probably the massive difference for me, is just preparation. The times I've been unprepared or done something wrong is the times it's had an adverse effect. So, like I say, obviously the preparation and making sure everything's running smoothly.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Cam. So I guess this one's for all of us, around sort of diabetes burnout. I don't know if anyone's been affected by this. It's not something that I've ever been through. I've had diabetes for 12 years now, I think it is. And it's not something that I've reached. Again, not to say that I won't in the future. There is those days where, it becomes a struggle. So I don't know if anyone's actually hit diabetes burnout, and if they'd be welcome to share how they felt about it.
I don't think I did quite reach burnout, but I think when I was at university,
I guess. Go for it, George.
I think there was a point where I was sort of balancing a lot, and that's the sort of thing, is that you're balancing a lot of diabetes. I was balancing dissertation, sort of professional cricket, and I sort of didn't necessarily pay a lot of attention to my blood sugars. But then I guess through periods of life you go through ups and downs, and I think that I just realized that it was just a really busy period. And then actually when everything calmed down, I stepped back, and I think, as Cam said, you sometimes do need to step back and just look at your blood sugars and look at your health, because that's one of the main important things. So I did go through a little bit of burnout, but sort of stepped back and just took a couple of months to sort of realize what was going wrong and what I needed to sort of work on a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, George. And I think, Gemma, did you want to come in there? I think you're a bit behind. Might come on. Can you hear us, Gemma? I think it's froze for her. Cam, have you had any experience of burnout?
Not so much major burnout. I just think so sometimes, like George said, days do get to the point where it's just a bit of a struggle. But at the end of the day, you know, it is your health, and that's kind of what I always try to refer back to, is just the fact that, you know, we've got it now, and that's you know, there's nothing you can really do about it. You know, the more you kind of sit and struggle with it, the worse it gets. So, you know, although I have had that point where it's just been frustrating, and you know, I do think sometimes it'd be nice to play a game without having to worry about it. But you know, that's what makes us as a person now. So I think as much as it does come with a bit of struggle, you know, it's just the reality, really. Not to mention that people don't struggle with it, but you know, it's just trying to stay on the positive side of it, I think, really.
Yeah, yeah. And on that one, you know, if people are struggling, there's obviously our helpline. There's also our youth program where it's very much around peer support. So if anyone is sort of affected by diabetes burnout, please do reach out. So yes, move on to the next question. So this again for all of us. So how do you cope with nerves and blood sugars before games or matches? I think for me, it's more adrenaline. I think with nerves and adrenaline, for me, it does spike my blood sugars before a game, especially if it's a big game. And I think it's just keeping an eye on them. You know, obviously I've got Dexcom, so always keeping an eye on them before the match, you know, during the warm up, and treating it as I need to, really, whether it's being low or whether it's being high. So yeah, so does anyone else want to answer on that?
Yeah, no, I sometimes when I'm really nervous or anxious before a match, just sometimes say it's okay to run slightly high. I'd rather be running slightly high than crashing quite low. So I think it's okay to sort of, for a period of time, run a little bit high. And as when your adrenaline's sort of you know, kicking about, it will sort of all calm down, you know, when you're nervous. So I think maybe ride that little high instead of sort of trying to sort of bring it down a little bit lower.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I think if you start, you know, chasing your levels, sometimes that's where you end up in a bit of a spiral. You then take your mind off of what you've got to do. I think, like George said, you know, it's better to run that a little bit high and have you focus on what you need to do, rather than your sole priority being, you know, getting your sugars in the right spot. It is a tough balance of trying to get what you need to do in the game and obviously managing your sugars. But I think, you know, if you can ride that a little bit high and then focus on the job you've got to do, then that's probably the better way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think an important thing on that is to sort of, you know, remember that it is different for everyone. Everyone has different sort of, you know, on different tech. Some people are still on injections and you know, all these things work differently for different people. Everyone's bodies are different. So just remembering that as we go along and answer the questions. So next up, again, it sort of leads into that. So are you scared of having hypos when playing sport? Yeah, of course. I think for me, like I say, they do tend to spike. So I guess that I know that hypo's coming later on. And I know there's a question in there around sort of how you find it over a longer period. And we can try and tie those two questions in together. For me, yeah, I think my hypos come later on. So it might be that I reduce my basal on my Omnipod by a certain percentage. And again, always just keeping an eye on where my blood sugars are at. And that's how I tend to deal with it, because it does have a knock-on effect throughout the night if I play on a Sunday afternoon. So it depends. So I'm making sure that I'm having a carby meal of an evening, maybe reducing how much insulin I have for that meal as well. So again, just speaking to your healthcare professional can help on how to sort of, you know, reduce that insulin if you need to, if you're finding that you are having hypos after a longer period. But I don't know if anyone's got any other experiences.
Yeah, I think mine's the same. Obviously, with it being a high intensity contact sport, it's never so much the worry within; it's always the worry without. You know, once I've finished, and I obviously live out of the city as well, of where I play, so it's an hour's drive. So that's always where I tend to feel it is on the way home. You know, it kind of comes down pretty quickly, probably quicker than it used to do actually now. And that's the challenge for me, is, you know, once that game's over, the next steps of making sure I'm not crashing too low. You know, usually it's pretty simple. There's plenty of services on the way home, so that's usually my stop off. But It's never usually during, because I know I'm safe during. That's when they go, that's when they ride high. It's always that probably 4-hour period after. That's the issue.
Thanks, Cam.
Yeah, and I'm the same. I think like I don't necessarily think having a hypo in a sort of high intense environment's normal. I think normal people have sort of bits when they're sort of having a little dip, but I think the one that's I get more scared, and this is where I prepare a lot, and I always have something on me. So if I do have a low, then I've got something close hand to sort of get me up quite quickly. It would scare me a bit more if I was in the middle of a cricket pitch, miles away from sort of the pavilion without any sugar. So that's why, giving it to the referee or the umpire, just so that if you do have a little dip, then there's something there that's sort of, and that's always eased my mind a little bit.
Perfect, thank you. Gemma, are you back, or you're just listening?
I am back. The weather out there is like a storm outside, so I think the Wi-Fi is just not playing ball. But yeah, I heard all of your comments just then, and I'm the same. I have had a few hypos during a game, especially in the summer when there's been like heat waves. Sometimes the heat has dropped my sugar levels, but like George just said, I always have the umpire have glucogel, and I just get that in my mouth as soon as possible. And it can be gutting when you have to come off, because in cricket I do tend to leave the pitch to wait for the sugar level to rise. And as much as it can be frustrating watching from the sideline for a bit, it's always important to put your health first. And none of your teammates will ever judge you for doing that. So yeah, always look after yourself first. Diabetes comes first, sport comes second.
I think on that note, we will close it, because you're about right there, Gemma. So I am going to close now. I know we've not got around to answering all the questions, but what we'll do is I can take them away, and I can pop them in the post-event email and see if I can get some questions answered there as well. So thank you for all the questions that we were eventually able to get in the chat, and thank you for all the engagement on the chat as well. It's really helpful for us. So to end, there are 2 final poll questions, so if you wouldn't mind answering those, that would be fab. Again, just so we're able to make our events better, and improve them and see what people need and want. So if we could get them polls up, that'd be great. The first one is, as a result of this webinar, do you feel that you have more knowledge and confidence to participate or encourage others to participate in sport? I'm aware there's quite a lot of healthcare professionals on the call, so this still applies to you. So maybe you feel a little bit more confident around encouraging people to take part in sport now, and give some more advice for them as well after hearing today's speakers. And then if you scroll down a little bit further down, it should just ask you, would you recommend this webinar to others? Fingers crossed there'll be good answers. And then once we've got quite a few answers on there, I'll leave it up for a little bit. So we'll end the poll there. I think we've got a lot of info there, so that's great. Thank you. So someone will be putting the contact details on the screen, our little tech gurus in the background. There's some contact details there for you to take away if needed. We'll also contact you in the post-event email, and hopefully we will be able to get the link across to you to the YouTube next week. So just hang fire with that and watch this space. I'd like to say a massive thank you to all of our speakers for giving up their time this evening. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as we did. And then again for you as well, all attending. It's been great to have you. Great numbers, great engagement in the chat. So thank you very much for all taking part. So take care, have a lovely evening. Enjoy Easter for those celebrating, and enjoy your long weekend as well. Thank you all for joining.